Hello, my fellow rebel capitalists. I hope you're well. Welcome to this evening's live stream or this weekend's live stream. Sorry I'm a little late. I was just on a call with our mastermind group of my good friends, Jason Hartman and Ken McElroy. And I'm back in my apartment. If you guys haven't checked out the Rebel Capitalist channel, definitely do so. If you're a fan of the type of things that we talk about, if you want to build wealth and thrive in a world of out of control central banks and big governments, you want to check it out because we talk about freedom and macro and Austrian economics and sound money and Bitcoin and gold and real estate, all the fun stuff. And we're really working hard to grow that channel. And we're up to about 27,000 subscribers, and it's growing quickly. But we're producing 3 or 4 videos a day over there. So it's a lot of work, but I think you guys will really get a kick out of it. So check that out. All right, let me fire into the questions here so we get to a lot of them. What do we got going on here? How much weighting do you apply on population, immigration decline, aging demographics, and probability of real estate investing playing a long-term demand? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to play into it, but it's all about location, location, location. So if you've got a great property in an A neighborhood and a good school district, even if we have a declining population, there's still going to be demand for your specific product. You see, if you owned all the real estate in the United States, if you're like Klaus in the World Economic Forum and you want to own everything, so we own nothing, then yeah, that would definitely play into the value of your portfolio as far as the demographics. But if you own a single family home in a great neighborhood with great school districts, that's going to hedge a lot of the downside. Now, as far as it's just you've got to remember that when you're thinking about macro, you've got to look at it in terms of cross currents, or you've got to look at it in terms of these like tectonic plates that are pushing against one another at all times, and it's just which one is pushing harder at the time and the other one's pushing harder. People like to think that are we going to have inflation? Are we going to have deflation? We're going to have both, because we always have both. There are always deflationary pressures, most always. There are always inflationary pressures. It's just a matter of which one's kind of winning, right? So a demographic problem is definitely a deflationary pressure, because you have fewer people, less spending. That can have a feedback loop where prices go down. If the country is over indebted, then you can have defaults, and then you have this deleveraging in the form of deflation. Now, often deflation is a good thing if the whole entire economy isn't built on debt, if it's built on productivity. But unfortunately, we don't have that in the United States. But then there's also going to be a lot of inflationary pressures. If you're considering inflation to be defined by the price of consumer goods going up, what is that going to be? Well, I think we're going to have central bank digital currencies. And I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow. Will it happen in 5 years? I think the probability is high. And if we do have a central bank digital currency here in the United States, let's say, it's like a Fed coin, that means they control or have more control over the amount of currency units that are in the real economy chasing goods and services. And more specifically, the amount of currency units that are on the balance sheet of non-bank entities. Because when you look at the QE, I'm not going to get into the weeds here on this live stream, but when you look at how QE actually works and how the auctions work and who's buying the treasuries and then who's selling the treasuries, and a lot of it, even if it's being purchased by the Fed, there's an argument for those dollars coming off the balance sheets of entities in the private sector beforehand. But you've got to realize that those dollars weren't really circulating with a lot of velocity. Now, that could have added additional balance sheet capacity for further lending in the real economy that would create dollars on the balance sheet of non-bank entities as opposed to bank entities. But the water is murky, to say the least. I think what we should be focused on, at least what I focus on when I'm trying to figure out the probability of consumer price inflation, or at least that cross current or that tectonic plate actually pushing back hard enough on the deflationary tectonic plate to move the needle. What I'm normally thinking about is how many dollars are on the balance sheets of non-bank entities. That's key, non-bank entities in the real economy, because those dollars are usually going to circulate with more velocity as well. Another thing I'd like to point out on that note is the most recent Macro Voices episode with my good friends Eric Townsend and Patrick Ceresna. They interviewed another person that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. She's someone that I've interviewed for my channel. Her name is Juliet de Klerk. I've had the opportunity of actually meeting her up in Vancouver with the first Macro Voices live event. And she made a fantastic point where she said that when you are transitioning into a world where the government is spending more money on things that are going directly into the pockets of people that make under $75,000, let's say, and they're doing that by taking money away from people who are, let's say, quote unquote, rich, right? The billionaires. A lot of, or theoretically, and it doesn't always happen this way. So, but theoretically, that should increase velocity, because you're taking money from people where they have a little less velocity, most likely, and then you're putting it into hands of people that have more velocity, or that will spend that money with more velocity. Now, that said, it doesn't always happen that way, because if the rich person is putting it into angel investing, then that money's going out, it's getting into the economy with the same circulation rate. Where what we've seen is over the last year or so, these stimmy checks going out, people are saving the money, a lot of them. So that's not really out there circulating. They're just going into money market funds that are basically taking those dollars and putting them onto the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. As we know, that's what reverse repo is. And that's why reverse repo is at 1.3 trillion, or one of the reasons. So I think that's another key ingredient that you need to think through, or a key variable to help you decide the probabilities. But so I know I'm kind of off on a tangent there, but I'm trying to get at your core question, because I think you're trying to, like all of us, think through what's going to happen with inflation, disinflation, deflation, and you're looking at it through the lens of demographics, which is a good idea, but also consider all of those things that I just talked about and many other variables. And just remember that we always have deflation. We always have inflation. It's just a matter of which tectonic plate is actually pushing harder than the other one to actually move the needle. Why do credit card rates tied to 10-year? Well, a lot of the interest rates in the economy are tied to the 10-year, but especially with credit cards, they're more so tied to a risk premium that the banks are going to attach to the possibility of loss or not being paid back. And then they're also going to be tied back to how much money the banks are making in other areas. So there's no free lunch, right? So when Dodd-Frank comes out with their regulation and says, oh, we're sticking up for the consumer, we're going to make sure that banks never charge you for a checking account. And I'm just throwing that out there as an example. I don't know if that's exactly what it said, but just you can get the concept through this example. So let's just say that they did that, and everyone's like, yes, Finally, I'm not going to be nickel and dimed by these stupid banksters. Okay, but then what they're going to do is they're going to take your credit card rate from 20% up to 26%. They're going to get you one way or the other. It's just pick your poison, right? So, yes, credit card rates are loosely tied to the 10-year, but they're more so tied to the risk premium and what's going on with the rest of the balance sheet's P&L. Should I purchase real estate in my name or a business name? It depends. Where are you in the United States? Yeah, it's probably a good idea, unless it's an owner occupant. I don't know, and then it would apply to the local laws in your state. But yeah, I mean, set up an LLC if you want to be safe, and just buy it in the name of the LLC, and make sure that you're keeping the LLC up to date with all of the regulations for the state and whatnot. And I'm not a tax planner or the lawyer. You'd probably want to check with them, obviously. So this isn't specific advice, but I can tell you what I do is in the United States, I do set up an LLC. I don't have an LLC for every property. I think that's excessive, but I do own my properties under an LLC. And maybe if you get up to 5 properties, and maybe you want to go over to another LLC just to spread it out a bit. But then when I buy real estate overseas, I do not use a corporation or LLC. It doesn't make any sense. They're not litigious. The risk of you being sued is just so infinitesimally small. It's not worth all the paperwork and having to file the additional taxes that you usually have to file in countries where you own real estate in an entity other than just yourself, or the I forgot what a self owner is called in Colombia, but it would be the equivalent of a sole proprietor or something like that. What are the probabilities of deflation hitting in the new year? So again, we've got it's a nuanced question, right? So I kind of answered that above, so I'm not going to go into great detail here, but what are the probabilities that prices of the stuff that you buy every day, the end user in the grocery store, in Home Depot, in Walmart, what are the chances that the price of that stuff going down? Almost zero. Almost zero. And I mean, just go back to the GFC and look at even, the CPI is cooked. We all know that. And even it drastically understates inflation. But even with a drastically understated CPI, it only went down for maybe 6 months or so. Check a chart, and it barely went down, maybe 0.5%, 1%, something like that, as far as prices in aggregate total. Now, as far as the specific cost, the cost of gasoline, the cost of lumber, maybe commodity like copper, yeah, sure, maybe that might go down, but I think that's just going to affect the P&L of the corporations. It's not going to really affect the P&L of the consumer. And when I mean P&L, I just mean their profit and loss, or their expenses. I think I just look at it in terms of like an entrepreneur in a business. So yeah, I mean, if you get higher prices solving the issue with cargo ships, that's great. But I still think you're going to see prices go up. Now we might get disinflation, but all that means is just lower rates of inflation. It doesn't mean that prices are actually going down. What are the biggest changes with digital money? I'm not sure the history of digital money, but I can tell you that the biggest changes would be. So I don't know if when you're talking about digital money, I don't know if you're referring to central bank digital currency. That's where most people get confused. They say, "Oh, well, we already have digital money, so who cares if we have a Fed coin?" They don't understand that the biggest difference is the fact that you would have a bank account with the Fed. So the Fed would be able to turn the bank reserves that they can print out of thin air that are denominated in dollars. They could turn those bank reserves into legal tender. So what would happen is you'd take your phone, you'd download the Fed app, and then the Fed would you'd have an account with the Fed, just like JP Morgan or just like the Treasury. You'd have your own TGA, the Treasury General Account. It would be the average Joe general account at the Fed. And but each one of you would have one. I want to be clear. So it wouldn't be just one in aggregate total. It would be one for AE here, who's asking the question. The next question looks like Matt Gebhardt. Matt and AE would both have their own accounts at the Fed, just like the Treasury, just like Goldman Sachs, something like that, or one of these banking entities. So then what would happen is if the Fed just said, okay, Matt, we want to send you, there's not enough dollars circulating in the system, so we want to send you $1 million. All they'd have to do is just create the entry on the, just type that into their screen, and then $1 million would go into your account at the Fed. And then you would take your app, and then you could use that app, just like Apple Pay, to go ahead and buy goods and services in the real economy. So effectively what they've done is they've taken bank reserves and they've turned them into legal tenders. So how's that different than what we have today, other than you just getting $1 million? Well, right now the Fed cannot get those bank reserves into the real economy. Those bank reserves just sit on the balance sheets of the banking system, giving them more balance sheet capacity, but they weren't deprived for balance sheet capacity in the first place to issue loans. I mean, look at what they have, 4 trillion in, close to 4 trillion last time I checked, in reserves. So they don't really need any more reserves. They don't need QE to issue more loans. That's not the problem. Their problem is there's no credit-worthy institutions out there, or the risk reward just really doesn't make sense to them to make those loans unless they can just flip them really fast to Fannie and Freddie in the form of a mortgage. That's why you see bank lending go down significantly since the end of the PPP loans that we had in 2020. So, think about that. If you're the Fed and you want to increase the amount of dollars on the non-bank balance sheets in the real economy, how do you do that? You can't. You can't. The Fed could do $1 trillion in QE tomorrow. And how would that affect the amount of dollars in the real economy? It wouldn't. It wouldn't. Because the banks then would have to lend more money to create those dollars that were circulating. But if there is a central bank digital currency, now if they create $1 trillion worth of bank reserves tomorrow, they could put those $1 trillion in the accounts of individuals that, let me say this specifically, they could take the $1 trillion and put it onto the balance sheet directly of the non-bank entities, meaning average Joe and Jane, small business, mid-sized business, even corporations in the real economy directly. So they would circumnavigate the commercial banking system. So from a standpoint of inflation, deflation, that's why digital currency, central bank digital currency, is really a game changer. And then, and obviously it's just incredibly Orwellian when it comes to their ability to spy on everything that you're doing, to control your spending, to limit your spending on certain items. They just came out with that credit card that monitors your carbon activity. So according to the World Economic Forum, every single one of your transactions, whether you're buying carrots or you're buying gasoline, every single thing that you do affects the environment negatively. Not my words, World Economic Forum. And so they think that if you had a credit card that at the end of the month would tell you not only your expenditures, so you could put those into QuickBooks or your personal accounting system, but it would also tell you that, hey, Matt Gebhardt, you destroyed the economy, or you destroyed the environment by this much. Or they give you some sort of score, some sort of carbon score or climate change score. and that would go into the red, or it'd be green or yellow or something like that. And this is out right now. It's a company called Duconomy, and it's been endorsed by the likes of the World Economic Forum and whatnot. So you can just look it up. It's Duconomy.com. I did a video on that on the Rebel Capitalist channel earlier last week. So this is in the works. And so although this is a private company, or so they say, a private company, you can see how that technology would just be used by central planners to take the next step in the lockdowns, if you think that that's the direction we're going, and that people were so willing to obey when it comes to lockdowns for the cerveza sickness. Why? I mean, look at Australia. I mean, I have people on my Twitter feed all day long saying how that the lockdowns are the greatest thing that ever happened to Australia, that they're just incredible. It's amazing. My life has never been better, that the government will only allow me to leave my house for 1 hour a day. You want to talk about sheeple. I mean, it's gone to a whole new level in Australia. Fortunately, the whole country's not like that. You have a lot of people that are pushing back for their freedom and liberty, but you got a lot of zombies out there, a lot of lemmings, that's for sure. So if they're so willing to go along with the government locking them in their house and only allowing them out for an hour a day, and not, by the way, not allowing them to leave the country, that's where it gets like bizarre and incredibly scary. Most of you have heard of what's going on in New South Wales, as an example, with how they've basically turned the place into a totalitarian police state. But what you don't realize is that they won't allow the Australians to leave. You can't leave the country. Now, you can get special permission, but who gets the special permission? Well, of course, it's the politicians, and it's the people who have the pull, the political pull, right? What's the saying? It's like, goes back to Animal Farm, that all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And that's always what you see when you have these government restrictions. Look at the mayor in San Francisco. She came out saying, with mask mandates and all of these things, and saying that anyone that didn't wear a mask is just, they're part of the problem, along with this. This is the cerveza sickness is a pandemic of the group I'm talking about. I want to keep this YouTube friendly here. The group that chose not to get the medicine. This is, all of our problems are a result of those knuckle draggers that are just too stupid to inject a foreign substance into their body, or wear a mask at all times. And then what happened? Of course, she's filmed at a party, at not even at her house. It was at a public bar or restaurant, a music venue, where no one's wearing a mask, everyone's drinking, everyone's cheering and dancing, and again, it's these rules are for thee and not for me, type thing. And then when she's interviewed and put on the spot, then all she does is sit there and sputter, and then try to somehow point back to the people that aren't wearing masks, and saying that this is their problem, and that we should be more strict and more draconian, and then just trying to evade the topic that she herself isn't wearing a mask. But it's the same thing in Australia. It's what always happens with the central planners. They make the rules for you, not for them, and you need to make sure that you're not polluting the environment while they're flying around the entire globe on their G6, a jet. For those of you who don't know what a G6 or G5 is, it's unbelievably the hypocrisy is just staggering, and we see it over and over again. But that's really something that you would think that the Australians would be taking to the streets, that they literally aren't letting them leave the country, for heaven's sakes. I mean, So my point there is that would it be any surprise that when they're coming out with these credit cards that tells you what your carbon score is for the month, that sooner or later the government will issue those, and if you don't have the right carbon score, then you're just locked in your house for the rest of the month because you've damaged the environment too much. And just like they kind of guilted you into obeying in 2020 by saying if you didn't obey that you wanted grandmothers to die, well, in the future they're just going to say if you don't obey, if you buy that extra steak this month, then you want humanity to be eradicated, and you want humanity to go the way of the dinosaur. You want to destroy humanity instead of just grandmas. And you can see, or it's not a stretch to see how people would just go right along with that. Oh yeah. Oh, what? You want me to lock myself in my house for the rest of my life and only leave an hour a day, but I get brownie points from the government on my carbon score? Oh, absolutely. I want to do my part for the greater good. So I think that's the direction we're going with digital money. Since America is becoming poorer overall, have you considered living outside? Well, yeah. I mean, I've since 2015, I've spent the majority of my time outside the United States. It's just the last year or so that I've come back because right now, I think as far as Arizona, Florida, Texas, I don't know of anywhere in the world where you can find more freedom. So until that changes, I'll be here regardless of. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say regardless of the taxes. I won't go that far, but I will say that freedom for me has become an even bigger priority than taxes. That's for sure. And back prior to the cerveza sickness, those were kind of at par with one another. But yeah, so I was in Colombia and I was in Medellin. That's where I spent a lot of my time. But unfortunately, Medellin right now, they've got mandates, they've got restrictions, that they don't have the type of freedom that we have in Florida, Texas, or Arizona. So I'm not going to go back until that changes. As far as Mexico, I've heard good things. I think Mexico is kind of hit or miss, depending on where you are. The good news is your purchasing power goes through the roof. If your income is in dollars and your expenses are in pesos, whether it's Mexican pesos or Colombian pesos, you like triple your purchasing power like instantly. So that's a good way to increase your spending power. Your standard of living is to do something like that. The but right now, honestly, right now, I wouldn't make any long-term decisions. I would try to get a passport for sure. I would try to think through a plan B, but I would not be trying to decide where I want to live for the next 10 years. There's no way. There's no way. The world is just changing too quickly. So what I'm doing personally is just trying to kind of ride it out in a state that has a high level of freedom, relatively speaking, and in each just take it in like 6-month chunks. Like the place I have here that you guys see in the background. This is a condo in a high-rise building in Phoenix, and I just signed the lease here till December or January, and at that time I'll look around at the world and see what it looks like and go from there. Hopefully, we go back to an environment that's closer to 2019, where we actually have a lot of options if personal freedom and liberty is a priority, which for most on this live stream, I would assume that it is. So that's how I'm tackling it right now. And unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you. I wish I could give you just a definitive do this, but if I did that, I'd be lying. And all I can do is just tell you what I'm doing for myself. And if I can't figure it out for me, there's no way I can figure it out for you. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. But what I can tell you is as things change, I will definitely keep you posted. I will talk about it on this channel on these live streams, and I will talk about it almost daily on the Rebel Capitalist channel. So that's another reason to subscribe over there if you're not already subscribed. What would be the equivalent of a call option on the Fed never tapering? I think what you're asking, Joel, is what type of call option could you buy if your thesis was the Fed will never taper? Let's see, let me make sure here. What would be the equivalent of a call option on the Fed never tapering? So you've got to start by asking the question, is the market offsides to begin with? In other words, does the market believe the Fed is actually going to taper? And if they do believe the market is going to taper, how are they expressing that bet? Is it in the yield curve? Uh, I don't think so. Last time I checked, 10-year rates were still pretty low. So is it in the stock market? Maybe. And we've seen the stock market kind of, it's gone down, up, down, up. I know a lot's going on with Evergrande and whatnot, but maybe we see some risk off right now. I don't know if I'd go so far to say that we're seeing risk off in cryptocurrency as a result of Fed taper, because I think a lot of that has to do with Evergrande and China coming out and banning crypto and Bitcoin and whatnot. But I would just, I would study it and try to, if, and this is a big if, you think the market is offsides, then where is the market offsides? And then if they are offsides, what will go up as a result? And I don't want to give you investing advice, Joel, but if it were me, the very first thing I'd look at are gold miners. I think people are way offsides when it comes to gold miners. And that would be pretty much exactly what you're talking about, because I think the gold market has gone down because people believe the Fed. There's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is people believe the Fed, they believe Jerome Powell, they think that they're going to reduce the size of their QE or taper, if you will. And I think, like probably you, that although they may do it for 3 or 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, who knows, maybe even a year, but sooner or later, that's not going to pan out for them. You're going to get a drop in the stock market or real estate market, something like that. Probably in the stock market, because that'll drop a lot faster, where it goes down by 20%, but it goes down in how they would define as a disorderly fashion. And they're like, ooh, whoops, sorry, QE again. Here you go, back to 120 billion. It's just once you build the economy, or well, I will say the economy, because it's really the financial economy, but now the real economy, it really revolves around the financial economy. So once the financial economy gets addicted to that level of quantitative easing, you can't just take it away. It's not like these animal spirits have just taken hold to the point where you can take away the heroin, the drug, and all of a sudden the animal spirits will kick in and compensate for the lack of the drug. I just don't see it working that way. And this is something that I really agree with Schiff. And if you haven't heard his take on it, I'd strongly suggest listening to his podcast, because he's been talking about it a lot. But if it were me, that's what I'd be looking at, man. I would say, okay, if the market is offsides with QE or with tapering, then I think that the market's offsides with the gold miners, and that's where I'd look to buy call options. But that said, I don't like buying call options ever. I like selling them to scale out of a position, but I don't like buying them. So just kind of remember that when you're listening to my analysis. Also, what if they don't increase asset purchase at the fast enough pace and the stock market stagnates? Yeah, exactly. So what happens then? What happens if they go from 120 billion down to 80 billion and the market tanks and they go back up to 120 billion and then the market keeps tanking? Then what do? To your point, they're going to say, okay, 120 billion isn't working. We'll go up to 200 billion. And then what happens to the gold market? Right? Uh, and therefore, what happens to the gold miners, especially like the juniors? If you got some solid juniors that you've got call options on, most likely the value of those call options goes bananas. But again, that's not investment advice. I personally would not do that. I'm just saying that if I'm trying to think about what could be offsides, the first thing that comes to my mind are the gold miners. Could deflation be coming to the U.S. in the next 6 or 12 months? Factors would cause the current inflationary environment to flip to deflation. It depends on what you're defining as deflation. So if you're defining deflation as consumer prices going down, I would say it's basically zero. Like prices going down. Now, I'm not saying that if prices are going up at a 10% rate right now, and what did you give me, 6 to 12 months? I'm not saying in 6 to 12 months prices won't be going up at 3%, but they're still going up. Are prices in aggregate total going to be going down by 3%? I would be shocked. Now, for some things, sure, absolutely. But again, when you're looking at the majority of what makes the CPI, such as owner's equivalent rent, uh, I mean, that's like 20-30% of the CPI. So, that going down, I mean, can anyone on this live stream right now honestly say they think food prices will go down in 6 months? You think wages are going to go down over the next 6 months? You think that the price of used cars, or even new cars for that matter, going to go down? I mean, your energy bill down? Unfortunately, I don't think so. Your health insurance, your kids' education, your medical expenses, the cost to go out to a restaurant, the cost to go to a movie, to get your hair cut. You think that's going to go down? I have a hard time believing that. Now, the input costs could go down slightly, but I don't think they're going to pass that through to you, because their input costs in the form of wages are most likely going to be going up. So now, let's shelf that for a moment. If what you're talking about are asset prices, then yes, absolutely. I think they could go down. We got to remember that during the early 1970s, from 72 to 74, the stock market went down, the S&P more specifically, by over 50% in nominal terms. So in real terms, it went down even further. And that's when you adjust for inflation. That was from 72 to 74. So during that time frame, did prices of the stuff that you buy daily go down? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We still had significant consumer price inflation while the stock market was going through a 2-year massive bear market. So there was deflation in stocks and there was inflation in stuff, in consumer prices. Now, there was probably inflation as far as the dollar losing value to other currencies. But we see and after the GFC as an example, the dollar bottomed out around 2010. Let's say it was 70 on the DXY. Now I'm talking about the dollar related to other currencies. Like the DXY is a basket of other currencies the dollar is compared to, and it's 57% euro. So in 2010, if my memory serves me right, the DXY got down to about 70. So that means the dollar was losing a massive amount of purchasing power relative to other currencies. Okay. Well, from 2010 to 2020, what did the dollar do? It went from 70 up to 100. Now, I'd ask you the question, did consumer prices, the stuff that you buy daily, did that go down from 2010 to 2020? Or was the price of stuff lower in 2020 than it was in 2010? Not even close. Not even close. Well, how is that possible if the dollar appreciated in value on the DXY? Because they're two separate things, two totally separate things, and people lump them into one little monolithic cube. That's not the way it works. They like to say, oh, we have deflation, and that means asset prices down, prices of stuff, consumer prices down, and the dollar going up on the DXY. Or they say we have inflation, that means asset prices up, rents up, that means consumer prices up, and that means the dollar down on the DXY, and the price of gold up, and all this, and they just assume that it's this binary conclusion, and it's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. And unfortunately, it's just the way we're hardwired as human beings. I don't know why. We just have this tendency to completely omit any nuance from a complex question. I always say that we always try to find simple answers to complex questions. But when you do that, 99% of the time you're wrong. Your conclusion is wrong. And there's no better example of that than what we're seeing with mandates. We'll call it that to keep it YouTube friendly, right? I mean, the risk reward profile of someone that's 70 years old that weighs 400 pounds and has diabetes is significantly different than someone who's 25 years old and is a triathlete and has already had the cerveza sickness. Their risk reward for getting the medicine is completely different. Not even close. So how on earth can we lump them all in the same category and just mandate the same things for the 25-year-old that we do for the 70-year-old? It doesn't make any sense, right? And that's why I always say it's not about health. I don't know what it's about. I would assume it's about gaining power and control and micromanaging your daily life. I think that's what's going on in Australia. I think it's a way of conditioning people. I think it's a way for politicians to never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think a lot of these politicians are just merely puppets of the global elite, the Davos crowd, the World Economic Forum, the IMF. And by the way, I know I had a lot of the questions on digital currency. What's the one digital currency that nobody's talking about except for the global elite? That would be the digital SDR, special drawing right. And that is the currency of who? The World Economic Forum and the IMF. More the IMF, but I kind of consider them as one because they're kind of tied at the hip. I look at the IMF and the World Economic Forum kind of like the Treasury, the government, and Goldman Sachs. It's like they just rotate employees. It's like it's really one group. I mean, come on, right? So yeah, they want the electronic or the ESDR to be the global digital reserve asset for central banks' balance sheets. They want that to replace the dollar, to replace gold, all that stuff. Well, what'd that do? Well, look at the exorbitant privilege that the United States has had by having the world reserve currency since 1944. Okay, well, just transfer that power from the United States. At least we're somewhat a democracy. Uh, we don't yet have a dictator, but just transfer that power to the unelected bureaucrats and individuals with an insatiable lust for that power that are, again, unelected at the IMF and the World Economic Forum. Those would be the ones that have the control power and really ability to micromanage the global economy like the United States has had since 1944. And think about that. Think about what we do to Iran if we don't like what they're doing. We just set up what? We just block them, right? We just block them out of the entire. We set up sanctions, and the way we enforce those sanctions is we just block them out of the SWIFT system. Like, sorry, we got the global reserve currency. You're not playing in this. You're not playing in this game, my friend. You're going to suffer. So just think if, I mean, it's bad enough that one country has the ability to do that. Just think if it was just one group of unelected officials. I'll let you guys just grapple with that for the next few days. All right. Okay, here's an interesting question. Can you explain the similarities and differences between methods used by the Central Bank of Japan in the early 1990s and what we're seeing currently? Yeah, so I talked to Richard Werner about this. I was fortunate enough to interview Richard last week on this channel, in fact, and great guy. We had a really good discussion. We actually talked quite a bit after we stopped recording, and so we'll definitely talk again in the future. But what he pointed out was a lot of things that fascinated me about that time frame because he was in Japan at the time. And he said that GDP growth remained extremely high even after the market started crashing. So even like a year or two afterwards, they were growing the economy by like 5, maybe even 7%. So everybody out there said that this was a buy the dip opportunity. And that goes back to it's not my idea, but I wholeheartedly believe in the hypothesis that the market will try to inflict the maximum amount of financial pain on the maximum amount of participants over time. And I think it's just a result of our hard wiring as human beings and kind of the flaws we have. But Japan was a fantastic example of that. Market started to go down, but the economy was still growing, was still quote unquote healthy. And then Werner was talking about doing quantitative easing. He was the person that coined the phrase quantitative easing. And he suggested that the central bank buy some of the non-performing assets off of the bank's balance sheets. So then they would go ahead and lend into the real economy and really continue growth in a sustainable way because it was from the bottom up, not kind of this top down approach. And they didn't do that. They just lowered interest rates. So he predicted that that really wouldn't do anything, which, as we know, it didn't. But in 1991 or 1992, when they first came out and just lowered rates, everyone thought that would stimulate the stock market. So all the people who didn't go buy the dip in 1990, 91, they definitely bought the dip in 1992. And what happened? Well, the market continued to go down and bottom out, I don't know how many years later, 5 years, 10 years later, something like that. And it went down by over 50%, 50%. And everyone just got crushed that bought the dip and thought that lowering interest rates would have a direct causal effect on the stock market. We have to understand that and to be clear, this is the part of the discussion I had with Richard when he was talking about the differences in Japan QE and the United States QE with Ben Bernanke. Because when Bernanke first started that, as you guys know, he was buying treasuries, he was buying mortgage-backed securities as well. So he was buying those, we'll call them toxic assets, although the treasuries weren't, but the mortgage-backed securities were. He was buying them from these banks in a way that Richard Werner said that Japan should have back when he was living through it during the 1990s. Now, Japan eventually did do that, but it was like many years after they initially just lowered interest rates and then called that quantitative easing. And I think they might have given the banks some bank reserves, or they did something like that, but they didn't get all the bad assets off of their balance sheet. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a proponent of quantitative easing. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. A lot of people think with my videos that when I talk about or explain like the dollar milkshake theory as an example, that means I'm predicting this is going to happen. And then the next week I talk about, let's say Luke Gromen has a theory on why the dollar is going to go down. So I will explain that and say, if you think the probabilities are high, this is potentially the knock-on effects, and these are the cracks in the system. And then the people will say, oh, George, well, last week you predicted deflation. This week you predicted inflation. You're an idiot. Listen, just keep that in mind. When I'm going over these videos, I'm always telling you constantly, it's not about certainties, it's about probabilities. Now, if I have an opinion on something, I'll tell you what my opinion is. But usually what I'm doing is I'm just explaining things to the best of my ability so you can come to your own conclusions, right? The last thing that you want to do in any circumstance regarding any topic, whether it's macroeconomics, whether it's finance, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's gold, real estate, or the cerveza sickness, the last thing you want to do is delegate your thinking, your critical thinking, to someone else. What you should be doing, in my humble opinion, is just taking data and information from a lot of different sources. Maybe it's my YouTube channel, maybe it's Luke and Brent on Twitter, Jeff Snyder and Emil with their podcast, Making Sense, Macro Voices, Real Vision, maybe CNBC and Bloomberg. And then kind of distilling that down to something that's digestible, and then coming to your own conclusions with all of that information. That's the way you do it. I always tell people on Rebel Capitalist Pro, that's the investment forum I have, which I've got to get to here in a moment. I always tell people that you can't, I wouldn't suggest using this platform just for stock picks. What's Chris McIntosh and what's Lynn Alden doing? I'm just going to do that. I mean, you can do that if you want, but I don't think that's a good long-term strategy. I always say that you want to use this forum or even my YouTube channel as though I was your research analyst and you are the hedge fund manager. Use me as your employee. That's what you want to do. So you're not coming to George Gammon to make the decisions for you. No. You're coming to me as you would an employee. You're coming to me as you would a research analyst if you were in charge of a hedge fund. It's just the hedge fund is your own personal portfolio. And you're coming to me in the form of these whiteboard videos or these live streams and these interviews. And you're sitting down, figuratively speaking, and you're saying, George, what information do you have for me? And I'm doing the whiteboard and I'm showing you all this stuff. You say, okay, that's interesting. I get it. Then Lynn, Alden, what do you have for me? Then you go on Twitter, let's say. Brent, Luke, Jeff, what do you guys have for me? Right? Then maybe you go to CNBC. What does Kyle Bass have for me? What's Gunlock have for me? What's Chanos? The guys on Real Vision, Raul, Grant, what are they doing? What do they have for me? Okay, guys, I get that, I get that, I get that. And then you're using all of these entities and individuals as your personal research assistants, but then you make the decision. They don't make the decision. I think if you try to employ that strategy overall, over the long run, you're going to have an edge. And if you have an edge in investing over the long run, you're going to make money. So I know that was a tangent. I can't circle back to what I was talking about, but I think that's a good place to end it. And guys, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Check out the Rebel Capitalist channel. I'll see you on the next video.